Hello everybody and welcome back to a new episode of Convert a Warm Cheerful Web Design to HTML and CSS. In the last lesson we finished up working on the header section, and now today we're going to take care of working on the banner. So this is where we last left off. We have some nice features, we have the navigation area, but now we're going to go and start building the banner. So at the very bottom we'll add a new section. I'll use one of my handy dandy dividers and we'll call this banner. Now within here, let's go back into our PSD. Now what we can see here is that, remember in a previous lesson I noted that we need to make sure that this background can extend vertically as much as possible, even when this text turns into 4 paragraphs. Otherwise we don't want it to spill over into this background and that'll look really strange. So the only way to do that was to have a wrapping div. What you'll find here, we had a banner wrap, and then the inner banner is responsible for the centered content at 960 pixels. So let's begin by taking the banner and applying this background and setting some other values. So we'll go here, go back to our style.css file, and we'll begin. Get the banner element, and the first thing I want to do, again, is make sure that I clear everything just in case. If there's any floated elements above it, this will make sure that no matter what, it clears those. Next, we need to apply that background image. So we can go to background, and the source is going to be go up to the root, go into the images folder, and we called it bannerbg.jpg. Now, we do want it to repeat horizontally and vertically, so I'm going to set repeat, or it's done automatically so I can keep it like so. So now if we go back into our Safari, you'll see that it's being applied, but we're still affecting the inside, and what we really want is for this to be affecting the outside. So if we go back into index.html, you can see what we need to do is apply that to banner wrap instead. So now let's go in and change this to banner wrap. So now let's try it out, and now you can see that background has extended as much as we need it to. And what's so great about this is, let's test this out, and let's grab these 2 paragraphs, and assuming this is dynamic content, you don't know what's going to be typed in there. So if I refresh, that will extend as much as possible and you don't have to worry about overflow issues. So that's always a good practice. It adds an extra div, so it's unsemantic, but it's really the best option. Okay, so the next step is to apply some padding to the bottom. In this, I just want to make sure that it has a little bit of breathing room at the bottom. And then next, if we come back into our Photoshop file, you'll see, if we zoom in closely, the designer added a handful of borders here. So we need to make sure that we reference those. So again, I can simply just grab with the eyedropper tool, come back to our project, and I can say border bottom 1 pixel solid, and paste that in. Let's go back to our project and refresh the page, and now if I scroll down you'll see that we've added a nice border there. Cool. Alright, so let's come back, and now we're done with the banner wrap. Let's begin styling the banner itself. So we can say banner, and if we want we can indent this, and the first step is we'll set a background to this one as well, because you'll remember within Photoshop there is a background to the inner content area, and it's this kind of brown noise background right there. So I'm going to add that in, background, URL, and it's in the images folder, and we called it banner inner BG when we sliced it out. Banner inner BG.jpg. And again, we want it to repeat on the x-axis and the y. So if I refresh, now we have that background being applied. Very cool. And because we also applied a class of rounded to banner, if we come back right there, this will also receive rounded corners, and it saves us a bit of time. Alright, but now there are some issues right here I can see right off the bat, like it's too close to the navigation area. I'd like to give it a little bit of breathing room. So let's do that right now. And we'll say padding, or better yet, let's do margin on the top of around 45 pixels, and that'll just push that down a little bit. But then I see one issue here is that the background of this isn't identical to the background above. You see there and there are different. So why don't we try, if we did padding, that's not going to be exactly what we want, because that's going to be applied directly to the container, like you see. So instead, what if we applied padding top to the wrapper? That way we don't have to deal with that potential issue, and that gets around it. Okay, so now let's go back into Banner, and I want to give it some breathing room all around. As you can see, if I zoom out a bit, all around here, there's breathing room. So if I can hit Shift-I to filter through these, and I can measure, and I can see roughly around 40 pixels on the left, and let's see on the top, whoops, let's do it one more time, around 30 pixels. So I'll set padding to, and you can play around with this if you want. So I'm going to set it to 50 on the top and bottom and 40 on the left and right. And let's see how that looks. Okay, but remember, notice how the width of this is now larger and it's exceeding the lines on the edge of this container here. And that's because, always remember, padding adds to the width. This is according to the W3C. If you have a width of 500 pixels, but then padding left and padding right of a total of 100, the entire width is going to appear to be 600 pixels. So there's one way to do box sizing, but that's kind of a newer method. The standard method is, if you have to apply padding, either do it to a child element within it, or reduce the width accordingly. So 960 minus 40 times 2, that's 80. 960 minus 80 is 880. So if I reduce that accordingly, now it should appear correct. And there you go, it lines up a little bit better. All right, so let's continue on, and I want to set some more styling. I'm going to make sure the color within it is white. And also, always a good idea to set a positioning context. Let's save that. And what we have there for now sounds good. So let's now style the heading 2 tag. And if you'll remember, the heading 2 is this bluish color. So let's go ahead and take care of that. Close this out. And we'll say banner H2. And here the color, when I measured it in Photoshop, was 3D82B. And next we need to apply a text shadow to get that color that we saw in Photoshop. And again, we learned it's just a matter of measuring. And when I came to it, it was 2B1F1A. Now, if this occurs often, you want to make sure that you export this to its own class or to a base styling. That way you don't have to repeat yourself over and over and over. Refresh the page, and that doesn't appear to be taking effect. So let's come back into index.html, and we are referencing that. Now, if that's not taking effect, we know that there must be some issue. So let's delete that, and let's see if there's any kind of missing semicolon. So I can do that. Let's just do something obvious, and if we change this to red, all right, so that is taking effect. So we just need to figure out what the issue is here. So let's go and debug this. This will give us a good excuse to debug. I'm going to go into the editor that I prefer to debug in, just because I think the extensions are a bit more powerful. It's Firefox. So if we go in there, we can use the excellent Firebug tool, and we can just decode and figure out exactly where these stylings are coming from. So I can click right here, and this will allow me to select anywhere up here. And I'm going to select the heading tag, and this will tell me what's being applied. So now all I have to do is scroll down and find out what is responsible for giving it the color. And now we can see banner is overriding the H2. So if I change this to red, that's now going to change. So that is our primary issue. So we can fix that fairly easily. And now I've made one more mistake on purpose so that you can see. You notice how this will show our H2 tag, but notice how it seems messed up here. And when you cannot see the color that we applied, that means you either missed a semicolon, or you're missing a quote, or you typed something incorrectly. So that gave me a good excuse to use Firebug. If we go back, take a look around and see if you can find it. Pause it if you need to. Okay, the problem is right here. We're specifying a color value that is only 5 characters. So, and better yet, let's go in, grab the color once again, and now you can see it should be 6 characters. And I bet that'll fix the problem for us. So paste that in. And also our text shadow, let's go ahead and add that right now. I'm going to paste it above, and 2B1F1A. And now let's go back and see if that fixed it. And sure enough, we get the blue color with the darker blue border. Next, I'm going to go ahead and set a line height of roughly 20 pixels. So the next step is, let's begin, if we come back into our project, if I refresh, you can still see we do have some issues here. We want to make sure there's padding. We want to make these images pushed all the way to the right. So if you want, why don't we do the images right now? We can come back and see that the images were stored within the div with an ID of featured. So why don't we either float them or position them absolutely. So we'll do featured, position, absolute. And this will allow us to position it anywhere within the space here. But notice that when you position absolutely, it takes it out of the flow of the document, as you can see right there. So now let's position it. And you might want to measure a bit in Photoshop. I'm going to push it all the way from the right, 40 pixels, and I'm going to push it from the top, 35. Okay. So when you see these values, just think starting from the right edge, move to the left 40 pixels. Starting from the top edge, move down 35 pixels. Come back, refresh the page, and now we push those over, and it's 40 pixels from the right and 35 pixels down from the top. All right, so let's continue on. And what else could we do here? Well, notice how the text here is going over it, but we don't want that. We need there to be a lot of space. If you come back into Photoshop, you'll see that in the original design, the author has lots of space here. So we can do that by using padding. And we can do that, let's target those elements, and we'll say banner H2 and get the paragraph tag. And all we're going to do here is apply, and you can use the ruler tool in Photoshop again, and apply padding right of around 400 pixels. So if I refresh, that still doesn't appear to be enough. So if we try 600, that's going to work. So if we need to get a better value, all we have to do again is just grab our helpful ruler tool and just measure from one end to the other, and here we can see it's roughly around 517 pixels. So let's see if we can get away with that. 517, and that's a rough estimate, but that looks pretty good, so that'll line up perfectly. All right, so now let's come back, and we need to take care of quickly those buttons. So let's come into Photoshop and notice how these don't even have to be buttons. If we want later, we can turn them into anchor tags. But there's a button. So one good idea is, why don't we apply a class name of button to these, or we can just target them directly as button. It just depends on the circumstance. So we'll come back up and we'll say here banner input, and let's also grab the banner button. So this way we deal with whether it's a submit input or it's a button specifically. And all I'm going to do for now is apply some margin right of 20 pixels, and that's going to allow for that space that you see right there. So let's come back, and if I refresh the page again, now we have a little bit of space. Later on down the line, we'll begin working on the actual button styling itself. So now I'm going to style the featured images. So if I come back, in the featured, we have just 2 images. So we could use the figure element for this, but we're not going to worry about that in this case. So let's come back and we'll say featured IMG. But what I want to do in this particular case is target this very first element. So traditionally, you might go ahead and add a class or an ID to it, but what's smarter, why don't we take advantage of pseudo classes? And I can say, grab that very first image that occurs within the featured section. Get the first child of the div with an ID of featured. So we go featured image, first child, and this is referred to as a pseudo class. So now all I have to do here is set if I want to move it top left, bottom right, I have to make sure that there's a positioning context. So I'll set that and then push it over 160 pixels, starting from the left, pushing right, and then starting from the top, pushing down, I'm going to push it 14 pixels. Refresh the page, and now you see I pushed that over. And all I'm doing here is making sure that it lines up correctly right here. So we can see later this next image is a little bit lower, it's behind it, and then again both of them have some shadows. All right, and it also looks like both images are coming below the brown background. All right, well, we can take care of that. Next, let's grab both of the images. So this will style both of them, and we're going to apply that WebKit box shadow. So we're going to do from the X offset 0 pixels, and then the Y offset, we're going to push it down 3 pixels, and then how much blur do we want? About 15. I'm going to have a lot of blur. And here, just in Photoshop, all you have to do is measure that shadow that you saw. And I came to 143D47. Okay, so WebKit, that is what Safari is run on, so that'll take effect. And now can you see that both of these images have this darker shadow behind it? Very cool. So that should line up just fine. The only final thing I need to do here is compensate for Mozilla and the official form, like so. Okay, so the last thing we want to do here is style the breadcrumbs. So notice that underneath we have breadcrumbs, we have a cool arrow, which we may get to later, and we have the blue background. And the background looks like it's underneath the brown because we can see the bottom corner of the brown, so it's on top of the blue. Okay, let's figure out how to do that. Well, we know that we placed it within a paragraph with an ID of breadcrumbs, just to keep it simple. So let's do that right now. Breadcrumbs. And next I'm going to apply a static background color. If we go into Photoshop and I open up my color palette tool, you'll see that we have a base color right around there. So I can use that. But take a look a little closer, and if I select multiple areas, refer here and notice how the designer is using a slight gradient right here. So first, let's create a fallback for the browsers that don't support gradients. And now we're going to do another background for the browsers which do support gradients. So we'll do one together, and we'll start by getting a color. Okay, that looks good for the first one. So why don't we start with Mozilla, and we'll say Moz linear gradient. And we begin by specifying what direction. It's going to go from top to bottom. And the next value is going to be what is the starting color. And the final value, at least in this case, is going to be what is the final color. So let's go to the very bottom, grab that, and we can paste it in. So now if we go back into our project, paste that in, that'll take care of Firefox. And let's go ahead and check that out. Refresh the page, and now you probably can't see it just yet, but we do have a bit of a gradient. So if you want to see that take shape, let's apply a line height, and that's going to almost simulate the process of adding some padding. So it's a very subtle gradient, but that is the key to good design. Alright, so now notice how it's coming above the banner, and that's because lower in the markup it's going to naturally receive a higher Z index. So if we want to override that, we can do so by setting a Z index. But we can't apply a Z index without a positioning context once again. So I'm going to set position to relative and set Z index equal to 2. And now what's going to happen here if I refresh is that nothing happens. And how come is that? And that's because, well, we've set a positioning context and a Z index, but we want the banner area to have a much higher Z index, or just higher. So let's go back into banner, and I can add that right here. And we'll say banner positioning context has been set. So now I'll set a Z index of 3, 1 higher. And let's try that out. Refresh the page, and now can you see that the banner is coming above? Alright, so now let's go back, and if we want it to be tucked underneath, we can use top -6 pixels, and this will only work because we've set a positioning context. Come back, refresh the page, and notice how we're tucking it underneath. Very cool. So let's go back into Photoshop and take a look at what we have here. Notice we have rounded edges here as well. So let's come back into our project. And if you wanted, you could do it right here. That would be one option, is just to add that helper class that we've applied right there. Now we also need to add some padding around this text. It's a little bit too much. So all we have to do is measure, come back to style, and we'll apply 40 pixels worth of padding on the left and right, and then 0 on the top and bottom. And that'll just give it some more room. But again, we have to compensate and reduce the width by 80 pixels. There you go. And now notice how that lines up really nicely. So the last thing I want to do here is notice how the text has a little bit of shadow. So we can just grab one of those colors, copy it, and we'll take the text and make it equal to white. Color is white. And then text shadow is we're going to go 0, and we're going to push it up just a tad, and we're going to paste in that color that we had. So if I zoom in just a little bit, you'll see now we have that white text and the border, but we still haven't affected the anchor tags because those have more weight. So let's target those as well while we're here. Breadcrumbs A, and again, color is white, and why don't we also make the font weight equal to bold? And now we get just a little bit more. So I'll zoom all the way out, and that looks pretty good for now. We have our whole banner section set up. Now if you decide that you want more room right up here, you can freely come back, and all you have to do is go back to featured and set the padding right, and you could bring it down back to 400 like we originally had it if you want. It's just a matter of what you need there. So we do need to work on the line height a little bit. We need to clean up these buttons, and we also need to take a look at the margins here. So let's move this over to Firefox, refresh the page, and if I take a look here, hover over the H2 tag, and I can go to the Layout tab, and I can review everything that we have here. So I'm thinking that the padding that we applied is maybe too high on the top and bottom. So why don't we take that down to 30, more like we originally saw in the design, and maybe that's a little bit better. We could experiment with 40. Maybe 40 is good. And then the last thing is I want to make sure, if I scroll down, that the top of the text lines up perfectly with the top of these images that you see right here. So that's the first step, is change the banner padding on top to 40 pixels. So we'll simply grab that and put it 40 pixels all around. And next, I want to go into the featured section and make sure that its position is compensated for as well. So if we go down to 20, I can line that up, and that's important. Make sure everything lines up. And here I came to 24 pixels, so I'll go ahead and add that in as well. So let's save that, come back, refresh the page, and now we have much nicer lines. Now if you wanted to make things line up better and make sure that no matter what, this area is consumed and this isn't overflowing too much, you can go back into Banner and adjust the padding so that maybe the bottom padding is 50. So you could say 40 pixels, 50, 40 for top, right, bottom, and left. Or if you use this shorthand, that's top, right, bottom, and if you omit left, it's assumed that your right padding value will be used for the left as well. So that's one thing to keep note of. Refresh the page, and that's going to be good for now. So we've taken care of our header, and now we've set up our banner section. In the next lesson, we're going to be styling all of this main area, but this is the simple process of going back and forth from a Photoshop file. So stay tuned, and I'll see you in the next lesson. Bye.